It was a rare day off, one that seemed to align perfectly with the universe's goodwill. No work, no emails, no responsibilities beyond making sure her 6-year-old son, Danny, had a good time. So when she saw the sign for Blue Lagoon Water Park on their way out of town, she figured, why not? It wasn't a huge water park, but it was big enough for a kid to lose his mind over. Towering slides, a lazy river, a massive wave pool. The kind of place that should have been filled with screaming kids and the scent of chlorine-soaked sunscreen. But today? It was empty. When she pulled up to the entrance, she hesitated. The parking lot was completely deserted except for a single faded golf cart parked by the entrance booth. A wiry man in a faded polo sat inside, absently flipping through a magazine. "Is it open?" she called out through the car window. The man looked up slowly, blinking as if surprised to see her. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Real slow today. You and the kid can have the whole place to yourselves." She glanced at Danny in the back seat. His face was already glowing with excitement. He was practically vibrating. "Come on, Mom. Let's go." With a small shrug, she parked. Maybe it was weird, but it wasn't every day you got a water park all to yourself. Inside, the place was eerie. No music blasting from speakers, no lifeguards on duty, no kids shrieking with joy. Just the steady hum of water rushing through the slides and the occasional splash from the wave pool's automatic cycle. Danny didn't seem to care. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the biggest slide in the park, a monstrous, twisting tube that started 3 stories up. "I want to go on that one," he announced, already making a beeline for the metal staircase. She followed him, stomach twisting slightly. Something about this felt off. The air was too still. The silence too deep. She shook it off. "Stop being paranoid." Danny was already at the top, waving down at her. "Mom, watch me." She smiled and nodded, stepping back so she could see the full length of the slide. Danny sat down at the top, pushed off, and disappeared into the tunnel. She waited for him to emerge at the bottom. Waited. And waited. A few seconds passed. Then 10. Then 20. The pool at the base of the slide was calm. No splashes. No ripples. No Danny. Her stomach dropped. "Danny?" she called, stepping closer. "Nothing." She turned, heart hammering, looking toward the control booth. The man was still inside, leaning back in his chair, not paying attention. Something was wrong. She ran up the metal staircase, taking 2 steps at a time, hands gripping the hot railing. At the top, she peered down the slide's entrance. It was pitch black inside. "Danny?" she called again, voice shaking. No response. Then, somewhere deep in the slide's darkness, a whisper. Soft. Wet. Slithering. "Come down." Her breath hitched. That wasn't Danny's voice. It was deeper, stretched, almost gurgling, like someone trying to speak underwater. She took a step back, her legs trembling against the metal platform. No. No, this is insane. Maybe she was hearing the water moving through the pipes. Maybe Danny was just stuck, scared, waiting for her to help. "Danny," she yelled, louder this time, panic creeping into her voice. "Say something. Are you okay?" Silence. Then, slap, slap, slap. The sound of wet feet on plastic moving deeper into the slide. Something else was in there. She stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the metal steps. Her mind raced. What the hell was she supposed to do? Going after him? The slide was narrow, dark. What if she got stuck? Her eyes darted to the control booth. The operator. He had to help. She bolted down the staircase, feet pounding against the hot metal, nearly twisting her ankle as she hit the pavement. "Hey!" she screamed, running to the booth. "My son, he's stuck in the slide." He didn't come out. The man didn't move. He was still leaning back in his chair, hands resting on his stomach. Only now his head was tilted at an odd angle. Mouth open. Eyes half-lidded. Unmoving. She hesitated just before reaching the glass. "Sir?" No response. Dread slithered down her spine as she reached up and knocked on the window. The moment her knuckles tapped the glass, his head snapped forward. His mouth ripped open in a silent scream. And then his entire body collapsed inward. Like he wasn't real. Like he was just an empty shell. The seat where he had been sitting was now filled with water. Murky. Dark. Moving. She stumbled backward, gasping, hand clamped over her mouth. No. No. This isn't happening. Behind her. The slide gurgled. Something was coming out. The gurgling sound deepened, a thick, wet churning echoing from the slide's exit. She turned slowly, her pulse hammering in her throat. The pool at the base of the slide was no longer calm. The water bulged, rippling outward as if something enormous were pressing against the surface from below. Then, a hand emerged. Not Danny's. It was too long. The fingers were pale, swollen, and webbed, the nails jagged and yellowed. It gripped the edge of the pool, clawing at the plastic. Then another hand. Then a face. At least something like a face. The skin was slick and stretched, like it had been soaking in water for too long. The eyes, small, black, too deep set, snapped toward her. The mouth was lipless, filled with rows of small, needle-like teeth. It grinned. She choked on a scream, stumbling backward. The thing pulled itself further out of the pool, its bloated body slithering onto the concrete. Water poured from its gaping mouth, streaming between its fingers as it crawled forward. Then, it spoke. In Danny's voice. "Mom!" She froze. "Mom!" It said again, head tilting, water dripping from its open mouth. The voice was almost right, but not quite. Stretched, warped, like an echo in an underwater cave. "Where's my son?" she whispered, her throat raw with terror. The thing's two small eyes blinked, slow and unnatural. Then it pointed toward the slide. Back inside. The darkness of the tunnel seemed to pulse, something shifting deep within. The air around it was wrong, heavy, thick with moisture that smelled like mold and stagnant water. Danny was still in there. He had to be, but so was something else. Something that had already started crawling toward her. Her body screamed at her to run, to turn, bolt for the exit and never look back. But Danny was still in there. The thing on the concrete twitched, shifting its bloated body forward. Its fingers flexed against the wet ground, dragging itself closer. "Mom!" it repeated, its voice warbling, mimicking. She took a shaky step back. "Where's my son?" she demanded again, her voice barely above a whisper. The creature didn't answer. It only grinned wider. Then, with sickening speed, it lunged. She barely had time to react. Her foot slipped against the damp pavement as she threw herself sideways. The thing's claws raked the air where she had just been. It landed hard on its belly with a wet slap, water gushing from its mouth in thick, reeking streams. She scrambled to her feet, heart hammering, and ran. Not toward the exit. Not toward safety. She ran toward the slide. Because if that thing had come out, Danny had to be inside. She reached the metal stairs and climbed, her hands slipping against the rail. The thing below let out a noise, something between a laugh and a gurgle. Then it dragged itself after her. She reached the top and dropped to her knees, peering into the slide's mouth. The inside was pitch black, pulsing with something thick and wet. A deep, distant whispering slithered through the tunnel. Danny's voice. "Mom! Help!" Her heart nearly burst. "I'm coming, baby," she gasped. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she threw herself into the slide. The darkness swallowed her whole. The second she hit the slide, she knew something was wrong. She had expected the usual smooth, slick plastic, the cool rush of water, the stomach-flipping drop. Instead, the walls were soft, wet, pulsing. She slid forward, but not like before. It wasn't gravity pulling her down. It was something else. Something that gripped her, guiding her deeper into the blackness. The air was thick, humid, reeking of rot and stagnant water. She twisted, trying to slow herself, but the surface of the tunnel wasn't plastic anymore. It was like flesh. It moved around her, tightening, contracting. She wasn't in a slide. She was in a throat. A deep, distant heartbeat throbbed through the tunnel walls. She tried to scream, but the sound drowned in the humid air. Then, a whisper right next to her ear. Almost there. The voice wasn't Danny's. It was layered, bubbling, like a dozen voices speaking from underwater. She thrashed, panic clawing at her throat. Then, she fell. The tunnel spat her out into freezing, black water. She went under instantly, the cold knocking the breath from her lungs. She kicked, flailed, fought her way upward until she broke the surface, gasping for air. The space around her was wrong. It was a cavern, huge, stretching endlessly in all directions. The ceiling was slick and wet, ribbed like the inside of some enormous, ancient beast. And the water, it wasn't water. It was thick, heavy, like ink, and it was moving. Then she heard it. A splash. She twisted, scanning the dark. Danny! Another splash. Closer. Something was in here with her. Something big. Then, from the shadows, a pair of small, pale hands broke the surface. Danny. She swam, pushing toward him, arms aching. But as she got closer, she saw what was holding him. And it wasn't human. Danny's small hands thrashed against the black water, his body barely visible in the dark. But something else was holding him up. Long, pale arms, too thin, too stretched, wrapped around his waist. The fingers curled against his stomach, pressing into his skin like they were claiming him. And behind him, rising out of the ink-black water, a shape. First, it looked like a person, a woman. But her limbs were too long, her head tilted too far, like her neck had been stretched. Her skin was the same pale, bloated white as a drowned body. Her eyes were black pits, sunken too deep into her face. Her mouth, it hung open. Water spilled from it in a slow, endless stream. Danny screamed. "Let him go!" She shrieked, thrashing toward him. The thing holding him tilted its head, those black sockets locking onto her. Then it spoke, not with words, with a gurgling, choking sound, like someone trying to breathe underwater. Then slowly, it sank. Danny's scream turned into a wet gurgle as the creature pulled him down, his little arms flailing against the surface. "No!" She dove, hands grasping, catching his fingers just as he slipped under. The water fought her. It was like swimming through tar, thick and resistant, dragging her down. She could feel it all around her, alive, shifting, pressing against her skin. Danny was below her now, his face pale in the murky dark, his eyes wide with terror. His mouth opened, bubbles streamed out, but no sound. The thing was behind him, waiting, watching, his mouth still open, still pouring. The water around it was changing, distorting, pulling apart into something worse. A second mouth. A gaping, black void stretching wider, wider, and Danny was being pulled into it. She kicked, hard, her fingers still latched onto his. She wouldn't let go. Not again. Not ever. Then, a hand, cold and clawed, wrapped around her ankle, and yanked her down. The thing pulled hard, dragging her deeper into the choking darkness. Danny's fingers slipped from hers. "No, no," she thrashed, kicking wildly, bubbles bursting from her mouth in silent screams. Her lungs burned. The pressure in her chest felt like it would crush her. The hand around her ankle tightened. Its grip was wrong. Fingers too long, skin too smooth and cold. It wasn't human. It had never been human. She twisted, trying to see it. And she did. Below her, stretching into the abyss, was something massive. A body that had no end. A tangle of limbs, too many arms, too many hands. Some curled, some open, all reaching, grabbing, pulling. The drowned woman was part of it, but she was only one piece. Its true body was deeper, vast, something old, something hungry. The water itself was part of it, and it was swallowing them whole. Danny was still in its grip, his little body kicking weakly. He was fading, his struggles slowing. No, no, no. With every ounce of strength left in her, she lunged. Her hands found his arm. She yanked him free. The creature let out a horrible, gurgling wail, the sound vibrating through the water like a deep scream. The hands pulled harder, trying to keep them. She kicked, fighting upward, dragging Danny with her. The water tried to hold them back. It was alive, wrapping around their limbs, curling into their mouths, trying to pull them apart. The surface was so far away. Her vision was going dark. Her arms burned. Danny's body was limp. No, no. She forced her body to move, kicking, pushing, breaking through. Then, they surfaced. She gasped, sucking in air, choking, coughing. Danny wasn't breathing. She hauled him onto something solid. A ledge, a floor, anything, and shook him. "Danny, wake up. Please, baby." His lips were blue. His chest didn't move. Tears burned her eyes. No, 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 no. Then, Danny's chest jerked. He gasped. Water poured from his mouth in a violent heave, his little body convulsing. She grabbed him, held him tight, sobbing against his soaked hair. "Mom!" His voice was weak, confused. Where are we?" She blinked, looked up, and realized they weren't in the water park anymore. They weren't even outside. They were in a room, a huge, dark, circular chamber. And they weren't alone. All around them, the walls moved. The walls were breathing, thick, wet, pulsing. The surface was slick and dark, covered in something that shifted beneath her gaze. It wasn't stone. It wasn't metal. It was alive. She clutched Danny tighter. His small body was shaking, still drenched, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Mom!" he whispered, barely audible. "Where are we?" She didn't know. Her mind was screaming that they had climbed the stairs of a water slide, that they had entered a tunnel, that somehow, impossibly, that tunnel had swallowed them. And now, they were somewhere else. A deep, guttural noise rumbled through the chamber, vibrating through the ground beneath them. Danny whimpered. Then, the walls shifted. Shapes pushed against the surface. Faint at first, then sharper, hands pressing outward, stretching the slick material like thin plastic wrap. Arms, faces, mouths opening in silent screams. Dozens. No, hundreds. She yanked Danny up, stumbling backward. "Stay behind me." The faces twitched, their empty sockets shifting toward her. Then, at the center of the room, the floor split open. A wound. A gash of pure darkness, spreading wide like a yawning maw. And something crawled out. It was tall. Too tall. Its body was thin, draped in something tattered and wet, clinging to its bones like rotted skin. Its face. It didn't have a face. Just a smooth, flat surface, slick with black water that dripped from its body in slow, heavy drops. It lifted a hand, long, bony fingers, the skin stretched too tight. Danny let out a small, strangled cry, hiding behind her. The thing pointed at them. And when it spoke, its voice came from everywhere. From the walls. From the mouths pressed against the surface. From the water still inside her lungs. It rumbled through her bones. "You came back." Her blood froze. The way it said it, Not like they were intruders. Not like they were victims. Like they had belonged here all along. And they had only just returned. Her entire body locked up. The thing's words weren't a threat. They weren't a question. They were a statement. Like a truth she had somehow forgotten. "You came back." No. That wasn't right. She had never been here before. She had never, But then, why did this place feel so familiar? Danny's small hand clutched at her soaked shirt. "Mom," he whispered, I want to go home." She swallowed hard, forcing her body to move, pushing him behind her. The thing didn't move. But the walls did. The hundreds of pressed faces shuddered, the mouths opening and closing like they were gasping for air. Some of them whispered. Soft, wet voices curling through the air. "She doesn't remember. She left us behind. She forgot." A shiver ran down her spine. No, I don't know you. I don't know any of you." The faceless thing tilted its head. More black water streamed from where its mouth should have been. It took a step forward. The floor rippled beneath its feet like it was walking on liquid, the surface twisting and changing around it. With every step it took, the whispers grew louder. Danny clung to her. His small body was trembling. She had to get out of here. She had to run. She grabbed his hand, turned, and bolted. But the chamber had no exit. Just endless, shifting walls of wet, pulsing darkness. She spun wildly, breath coming in panicked gasps. There had to be a way out. There had to be. Danny suddenly let out a sharp cry. She whipped around. The thing was right in front of them. It hadn't moved. It had just appeared. Close enough that she could feel the cold moisture radiating off its body. Danny was staring at it, wide-eyed, his breath quick and shallow. Then, it reached out. Not for her. For Danny. A long, clawed hand stretched toward his small, shaking frame. Her body reacted before her mind could. She grabbed its wrist. Her fingers met freezing, wet skin. And in that instant, a flood of memories rushed into her. The water park. The slide. But not today. Not this time. Years ago. Danny had been here before. And so had she. The thing's grip tightened. And she remembered everything. A flood of memories slammed into her, so strong it stole her breath. She had been here before. Years ago. Danny hadn't even been born yet. She had been a child, small, excited, just like him. It had been a summer day. A trip to the water park. But she hadn't been with her mother. She had been with her sister. Emily. A name she hadn't spoken in years. A name she had forgotten. But now she remembered. They had played all afternoon, running from slide to slide, laughing, screaming, daring each other to try the tallest one. And then, Emily had gone down first. And she had never come out. Just like Danny. Just like now. She had screamed for help. Cried. Begged the lifeguard to do something. But when they checked the slide, it was empty. No sign of Emily. No sign of anything. They had searched for hours. Days. But Emily was gone. Her parents had never forgiven her. Never looked at her the same way. And eventually, she had forced herself to forget. But the water park ***, this place ***, hadn't forgotten. It had waited. For years. And now it had brought her back. The faceless thing stood before her, watching, waiting. Its claws still wrapped around her wrist. It didn't pull her closer. It didn't attack. It just held her there. And in the deep, pulsing dark, she understood. This wasn't just a place. It was a hunger. A thing that had existed long before the water park had been built on top of it. A thing that took those who entered. And it had taken Emily. Just like it had almost taken Danny. Her heart pounded. No. Not again. She wouldn't let it take him. She wouldn't lose him too. With a roar, she yanked her arm free and shoved the thing back. It staggered. Like it hadn't expected her to fight. Danny whimpered behind her, but she didn't turn. She grabbed his hand and with everything she had left, she ran. The walls shrieked, the whispers turning into a deafening wail. The room twisted, shifting, closing in. The thing lunged after them. But she saw it. A sliver of light ahead. A crack in the darkness. An exit. She threw herself forward, dragging Danny with her eye. And they fell through. Into water. Real water. Chlorine-filled, sunlit, ice-cold. She broke the surface, gasping. And found herself back in the pool. The pool at the bottom of the slide. The water park. It was normal again. The sky was blue, the sun blinding. Danny coughed, spitting up water. His eyes were wide and confused, but he was here. Alive. She pulled him close, pressing her forehead against his, shaking. Then, a voice. Everything all right? She jerked her head up. The operator was standing near the booth, squinting at them. His expression was bored, lazy. Like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just been a hollow, empty shell. Her breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. She looked around. The park was still empty. The slides were still towering, twisting into the sky. The air was still and silent. Like the world had simply reset. Danny clung to her, and she knew they had to leave. Now. She scooped him up and ran. Didn't change. Didn't dry off. Didn't look back. She threw open the car door, shoved Danny inside, started the engine with shaking hands. As they peeled out of the parking lot, kicking up dust, she risked one last glance in the rearview mirror. The park loomed behind them. Empty. Still. Waiting. And for just a second. At the top of the tallest slide. She swore she saw a small figure. A little girl. Soaking wet. Staring after them. Her sister. Then, the car rounded a corner. And the water park was gone. Like it had never been there at all.